Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. Today we are thrilled to have our returning guest, John McElroy from Autoline Network, Loren McDonald, the founder of EV Adoption, and Matt Teske of Chargeway, joining us for a mid-year check-in. Earlier this year, John, Loren, Matt, and I shared our predictions for the electric vehicle industry in 2024. Now it's time to see if those predictions are shaping up for the better or if some of us were off the mark. And I'll give you a hint, I was off the mark. We'll delve into everything from consumer perceptions of EVs to the automakers who are leading the charge in areas where improvement is still needed. Don't miss this insightful discussion with some of the industry's top experts. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it with at least one other listener who you think would appreciate it as well. Don't forget to leave us a positive review on our podcast page too. It really does help us engage with more enthusiasts and bring you the content that you enjoy. With that, enjoy. It's probably still one of our most popular episodes was back in January where we looked at kind of a take at the market and what we'd seen in 2023 and then gave a forward-looking statement or so we thought of 2024. And how our predictions have come true, maybe some changes we'd make on it, and maybe what we're forecasting for the rest of the year. In case anyone hasn't seen that episode yet, you definitely need to watch it. But I think I'm just going to let everyone go and do a real quick kind of brief about themselves if people listening aren't familiar. So, John, I'm looking at you on the camera, so why don't you kick it off first?
Sure thing. John McElroy, been covering the automotive industry as a journalist my entire career. Goes back many, many decades, but now's the best time ever. This is the most exciting time in the industry.
Thank you. Matt, how about you next?
Matt Teske, and I'm the founder and CEO of Chargeway. Been in the auto sector for about 25 years and founded Chargeway officially about 7 years ago to simplify EV charging for everyone. And so, boy, is that conversation becoming more relevant.
Very much so. And Loren, we'll let you be next.
Yeah, Loren McDonald, CEO and founder of EV Adoption. We're an EV and EV charging data and analysis firm. Unlike John and Matt, I don't have decades of background in the auto industry. Obviously been following it for my entire life, but really just kind of joined in the EV industry about 10 years ago.
Well, 10 years is pretty good. I actually just kind of going off everyone talking, I had to write a bio recently for an article I was writing. And they're like, how have you been dealing with electric vehicles? And I realized I have been playing with electric vehicles for 2 decades now, which kind of blew my mind. And then, Loren, I think it's funny too. As you probably know, I've been talking to Chris here in Bend. And it's just kind of funny how not only have I been playing with EVs, but we do also can have the software and tech background. And then obviously John and Matt, we've both kind of become friends and connected through work over the years as well. So it's a very small world, but also one that just seems to be bringing a lot of people, maybe let's just say automotive nerds together. And so I'm excited to be talking about today.
Hey, Chase, I do have one anecdote just to prove that I'm not totally late to the market is I actually applied in 1996 for a public relations position at U.S. Electric Car, based out here in Sebastopol. They, they didn't survive much longer and stuff like that. But I actually have the postcard they sent me back thanking me for my application for the position. So,
well, you got me beat then. I think I was in the 7th grade at the time. So
that we won't talk about how old we are. John and I can arm wrestle about that.
But that's cool that you go back that far in EVs. That's impressive. I mean, you were in early on.
It kind of blew my mind. I feel like Matt, you and I probably met at like a Drive Oregon thing like a decade ago. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, that was a few years ago. And then COVID time and everything else. And I started kind of doing the timeline that I've been doing this crap. And I was like, oh my God.
It's all a blur anymore.
It's a little scary.
I reference things in my mind. I'm like, like a year or two ago. And then you sit back and go, oh wait, there's 2 digits there. That's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, let's get back to these predictions we had earlier in the year. I'll kick it off with mine. I think mine was that we were going to see for automakers and especially EVs to be more competitive, that they would start offering electric vehicles with more range. And maybe it's still a little early in the year. I'm going to say that really hasn't come true. It's been more looking at how to just make the cars cheaper, which is also a good thing.
Yep.
And just offering more models with LFP chemistry, which doesn't really surprise me at all. But I was kind of hoping to see maybe more vehicles kind of get in that high 300 range as an option for a lot of cars on the market. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts or things you want to add to that.
Look, Chase, it's obvious. You just mentioned it. They're trying to bring the cost down while you put in a long-range battery, and you just destroyed that effort.
Go for it, Loren.
I was just going to say, no, agree with John. I mean, there's that trade-off, right? Like Mary Barra will tell you hours on end that, their customers want 300 or more miles of range, right? They have always seen that. Most of the automakers look at that at sort of the inflection point. So most of them have sort of checked that box, right? And so then it's like, oh, well, it's $55,000-$60,000 for our EV. Okay, we've got to work on the cost side and stuff. And so, and the reality is, the people that still say they need 400 or 500 miles of range ain't going to buy an EV for another 10 years, right? So let's focus it on the people who say, I can drive my two kids to grammar school 2 blocks away in my SUV with 300 miles of range. That'll work. It's like,
I got a question for you guys. So the EV thing's not happening as fast as was expected, or regulations really were trying to push. Biden administration just backed off, said you can build a lot more hybrids, especially PHEVs. So my question to you guys is, what do you think? Is the American public going to go for PHEVs or even EREVs?
Oh, well, first of all, I don't like the differentiation between EREV and PREV. I think it's like completely pointless. Because functionally speaking,
I mean, from an automaker standpoint, you get rid of the transmission, you get rid of drive axles, you can.
But it's the use case on that's true, but it's the use case on the consumer side for how they fundamentally understand how to use it, right? So no one understands the engineering. But I think that. Well, getting back to one thing is like on the extent, so unpacking two things. One is, Chase, your comment about like the range aspect of it. I think there might be some that argue, okay, well, we've got 400 range trucks now, like the Silverado or something. It's like, well, yeah, if you cram 200 kilowatt hours of battery into something, sure, you can get range, right? I think that, Loren, to what you were just saying, and kind of this whole conversation, and to that point about the mix of what is the fueling option for these models. I think that the people that are looking for range of 300 or 400, whatever it might be, and how we feel like the OEMs have kind of achieved that, at the end of the day, it's not that they're seeking range, they're seeking peace of mind.
Yeah.
That's really what people want. And so it's the mix of, do we do that on vehicle side, or we do it on infrastructure side, and how's the blend of that work as we bring those things to market? So John, to your question about, what does that look like? I think that, again, my 2 cents on the news that came out of Q1 and into Q2 of people that were gravitating towards hybrids more so than electrics. I think that we're seeing that the public is understanding and appreciating the reality around fuel cost, efficiency, and they want that. They're also, to the point of cost of a pure EV, they're like, well, I can't afford 60 grand, but maybe a $30,000 hybrid, sure. So it's a combination of factors, I think, for just kind of like the psychology of it and how people are appreciating where the efficiency aspect is going. As for the PHEV side of it and for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, I don't necessarily think that it's going to create. We in the industry feel like those are lily pad vehicles, kind of like you get your hybrid, you get your plug-in hybrid, you get your pure electric, right? And I think that that's true, but the use case of a plug-in hybrid matters. And we've already seen evidence of someone will lease a plug-in hybrid for $199 a month and never plug it in because they leased it for $199 a month and just opted to use gas. So I think until people understand how to actually blend the use case of when they charge compared to when they use gas and how it fits a lifestyle aspect, I feel like we're going to see a lot of wasted engineering go unused. So,
I would just add that I'm still, and I think I sort of went off on Ford and GM and stuff last time, but of why they just thought they could go from ICE to BEV with nothing in sort of between, just sort of like, us crazy granola eating people out in California will do that, but there's this whole thing called the South and the Midwest and the plains and stuff where 80% of them drive Ram, Silverado, and F-150s and towing boats and stuff like that. And plug-in hybrids are the perfect mix for them, like the perfect solution for them until they're ready for BEV. And then hybrids, obviously, like, people hate it when I say this, but I've been seeing a lot of this now on LinkedIn, is like, every car should be at minimum a hybrid now, right? Like, let's just let's go from 20 miles per gallon average or whatever it is, 22, 24, whatever it is, to 35. Like, let's just, like, if we want to actually solve the emissions problem, the fastest way there is just like no cars with under 20 miles per gallon. Like, every car should have 30, 35, whatever at minimum, right? Like, it doesn't, and Matt could talk about this for hours. It requires zero human behavioral change, right? And we're at 1% of the 285 cars in the US on the road are fully electric, right?
We gotta start somewhere, Loren.
We're not going to transition this by the next 5 years to get everybody BEV. We've got to do the to use Matt's term, the lily pad approach.
I love that term, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, instead of just going, damn, that guy in North Dakota is not going to buy a BEV till 2035. Let's get him out of his truck that's only getting 14 miles per gallon and get him one that's got 25, right? We've almost cut 50% of emissions, right, by doing that, right?
I think to your point, I think one of the things that just the evidence that keeps piling up, in my opinion, from how the auto sector has responded in a lot of these moments is that they've been reactive. I just don't get the sense that there is a lot of proactivity around what does the evolution of their vehicle lineup truly look like to align with emissions focus and how we translate that to use cases based on lifestyle. I just feel like it's just been this reactionary, like, oh, wow, Tesla's a $1 trillion company now, X amount of years ago. We got to do something to change people's perception of who we are as an entity to then pump up our image or stock price or whatever it might look like. It just never struck me that there was a kind of a measured moment where they sat back and said, okay, how do we actually compete here while bringing what we have been forward to get to where we want to go to compete with this new, pure electric world? And in that respect, and that maybe that's we're seeing the result of that now. Is you've got dealers saying, hey, these things are sitting, like but we got people coming about hybrids, and it's that consumer psychology and how do you approach the market with the right product mix. And to your point, it's like the fact that they just cut it off at the neck and said, no, we're plugging hybrids. We're just going from pure gas to pure electric. Yeah, there was some, I think, some missteps there.
Yeah, so. John, I don't know if you were at that event back in Detroit, one of the GM events where Mary basically, this is about 5 years ago, I think, Mary basically said, GM doesn't do very well on the coast. Like, the majority of our market is in the middle of the country. But the Chevrolet Bolt is crushing it on the coast, right? Yeah. And so then what do? Their strategy is, let's just make EVs for the coast. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What if you actually had thought then? And by the way, at the same time, they said, we're not going to make hybrids or plug-in hybrids anymore, right? When the middle of the country was the quasi EV market for hybrids and or the electrified market, which everybody hates that term, but the electrified,
if it doesn't fill up with electricity, it's not electric. Sorry.
But anyway, they just I just still don't understand some of the decisions that some of these companies have made. But
so no, that's a great rant, and I think what's so funny is everything you guys have said is so spot on and jumps so far away from where we started with the prediction of the battery range. So I'm just going to say my quick 2 cents on that. And yes, I think exactly what you guys are saying is the vast majority of trips do not need that big a range. I am in kind of a small percentage of a crazy EV person who will go 800,000 miles a day. And so unfortunately, but not surprising, that hasn't come through. However, we're starting to see maybe better charging peaks, better charging curves to kind of get around that and address that and still kind of come at that lower price point. I think the big conversation, what's really interesting from everything you guys just said, was around the public perception and the understanding and the education of the vehicle platforms. Mm-hmm. And I just recently had a very I don't want to say eye-opening, but it was like kind of reaffirming and kind of it's surprising that this hasn't changed more in the last few years. I was at a recent dealership. It was a smaller town, but it's off I-5 on the West Coast. So it is you would think it's one of the leaders. And I went into a dealership. I was interested about a certain um, product from a company in Michigan that has 150, a 250, let's just say, of these different things. And I could not. The people. I actually was one of the best dealership experiences I've ever had in my life from a person. Like they were super personable. But the instant I showed any interest in the electric thing, they're like, "Oh, you don't want to deal with that. You got." And they were trying to just get me in the gas and diesel one ASAP because of the incentives and all this stuff. It just makes the sales process so much more complicated for them. And I think it's like unless the person is coming in specifically for a model to buy an EV, the sales and dealership model still does not want to deal with it. And it was kind of surprising and really interesting, kind of in light of the recent news about Ford kind of pulling back what dealerships can and cannot sell EVs and kind of like the different tier models around that. But
and I think that's going to be calamitous. I mean, you've got a dealer network that is frustrated by the fact that they just kind of feel like they're getting yanked back and forth for, okay, if you want to sell these things, you got to commit to X dollars and do X, Y, Z. Oh, never mind. Now everybody's just going to have open access to this thing. So you've got dealers that are going to be contentious with that back and forth. But then to your point, Chase, you still have a buying public that is predominantly walking in, still anticipating and hoping that the dealer can answer their questions based on their curiosities and interest. And you combine those two things, and what will that add up to? Not a lot of EV sales, unless someone walks in and says, "I'm getting this car that's electric." I mean, that's the type of person that will still walk away from that. And there's a lack of appreciation about that from I think a lot of stakeholders still.
Well, do you remember what your prediction for this year was, Matt?
Oh, I'm sure it tried to sound smart, but what did I say?
To summarize it, your prediction was that the hype train of EVs is derailing.
Oh boy.
And that it still kind of goes back to what you have said for years around just once again the disconnect in product and positioning of what the consumer wants and needs for that realm.
Well, I feel like I'm always very repetitive when I get a chance to speak about these topics, but I feel like I'm just kind of like that person who's been screaming a warning for like 7 years, like this is gonna happen, and so we're finally seeing some of that happen. And I think that even the comment that Mary Barra made the other day about GM's vehicle lineup will be dictated by customer demand, and the moment that was uttered, I thought, there you go, like that's an about face from the. What was their tagline? Everybody electric. I got the Fleetwood Mac song that played in my head for like I don't know how many days on end because of how many times I saw that ad. And it's just so just disappointing because it is obvious that and I think Loren, your comment was like, yeah, I mean, I will say exactly what I think you said, which was like, marry whichever way the wind is blowing today, Barra. Yeah. And on the comment that I made on LinkedIn about it. And I just said, yeah, that translation, what is she saying? If people aren't walking in demanding cars around electricity, they're not going to be pushing EVs that hard. That's just the truth of it. And so to your point, Chase, if that was my prediction about the hype train is coming off the rails, I mean, yeah, I think that, and I think the thing that I was trying to convey with that is that, again, the whole cliche of you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And we have, I think, kind of exhausted the goodwill of the public on the hype around the promise of EVs. Not like anybody did it explicitly, but the industry just kept really just going about like, this is it. And everybody that just kind of glommed onto the hype, industry included, that started making decisions around product lineup that, oops, they weren't comprehensive about it. They're now doing this backtracking, and it causes the public to just take pause and say, well, then what do we believe? And you can't go away from that. That's a stink that you have to figure out how to clean off of you. And you don't do that just by repeating the same stuff again. So I think that that's what I was getting at with that prediction. So I don't like the idea that I might have been somewhat right, but we have to clean it up as an industry. We've got to be more thoughtful around this.
No, for sure. I think a big part of essentially what it kind of boils down to what you're saying is these companies having a cohesive long-term strategy and plan for all of their vehicles, whether it be electric or not, or as they say, electrified for the others as well. And I think it is interesting because a lot of the pro EV people, just in general lately, have been saying, oh, there's so many headlines about electric vehicle sales not being that great. Well, are technically still growing. And it's not that we're talking about that. It's just that they're not growing as fast as they should be. And with these kinds of missteps and not having a full cohesive plan, it does kind of open up the door to longer term issues to really see that space take off.
Yeah, it's like put your hockey sticks away. Like we have to be more thoughtful around that.
Well,
I mean,
I'm just curious, Chase.
Yeah.
You used an interesting word. They're not the EV sales are not growing as fast as they should be, right? Like, define the word "should." Right? Like, is it Matt's comment about the hockey stick? Is it to save the planet from global warming, or is it what?
That's actually something I wanted to ask you guys a little.
The U.S. market would likely allow.
No, exactly. So to go on a little bit of a, I guess to derail the conversation a bit, but
no rails.
I don't know.
This
Now
year.
I'm
No
just thinking
rails.
train analogies all the rest of this conversation, unfortunately. But what you're talking about is really spot on about how this kind of perception and positioning in the market of electric vehicles has changed. Like, you think back to the Nissan Leaf. I don't think it was a great campaign, but like when they first launched, they showed like polar bears. And I know you've even talked about this a bit, John, on Autoline, about like, oh, the environment stuff, which I think people like it as a perk, but it's not really a selling feature. No. And now, like, you look at Rivian just refreshed a lot of their vehicles. What did they sell? They sold nothing about its environmental credibility. If anything, maybe it's not, because it is such a big truck, but they sold the hell out of performance and the positioning of that and the positioning of lifestyle. And I think that's kind of been where a lot of the startups or kind of traditional startups have succeeded, was say, yes, it can do that, but position the advantages of kind of an electric platform first. And then some of these more traditional, like legacy auto OEMs, going back to exactly what you're talking about, like, oh, stock values for those companies is skyrocketing. Let's get on that.
Yeah.
And then kind of just, I wouldn't say throw something against a wall and see what sticks, but there just didn't seem to be a very pragmatic or multifaceted solution to kind of moving the battleship of these companies.
Well, there's a lot to unpack with that. I think the comment I made recently about how the U.S. EV auto market has started to kind of feel, it's akin to a moment in a high school classroom where the smart kid was gonna pass the test and everyone else copied off the smart kid to pass the test. And then when it came time to apply your knowledge about actually using that knowledge in the real world, well, the people that copied didn't get that far, whereas the smart kid kept going. I mean, this is, again, the analogy, Tesla, everyone else kind of thing. We could also argue how that feels around where Tesla's at too, and how they're derailing in some ways, I think, in the EV conversation. But I think that there's so much to point to that, like, to your point about pragmatism, and like, it just, that there was not to me, there was not a sense of kind of a humility around, like, we don't do this yet. We really have to figure out how to do it. But then how many times are decisions made in American business and in capitalism that are purely based around, we're a business. Like, how do we maintain relevance from a financial perspective to show that we're competitive? And how often is that thought of in short-term cycles? The answer is quite often, really.
Okay.
It's the bang for the buck type thing.
For sure. But John, I want to hear your perspective, because you are in the heart of Michigan. It's just a bunch of us West Coast elites just kind of blathering and saying perspective. What's the truth? You're in the heart of the
issue of what's going on.
Yeah.
Last year, Americans bought 1.1 million electric vehicles. When you tell the anti-EV people that, they're stunned, because they're running around saying nobody wants them. And then I tell them, 1.1 million Americans bought them last year. That's, not chopped liver. And this year, the prognosticators that I'm talking to, the forecasters, see EV sales coming in around 1.6 million. That's pretty healthy growth. In fact, that's
are we on track for that through? Are we on track for that through half the year?
No, we're not. Yeah. In fact, they expect a very strong second half. Look, GM's coming out with 4 or 5 models. Honda's and Acura just getting into the market. Rivian just refreshed. There's going to be a backloaded second half to the year. Yeah. Stellantis is coming in with a bunch of stuff. So that's how they think we're probably going to end up at 10% market share. They think the SAR is going to be 1.6 million. So that's how you get to your 1.6 million EVs. That's pretty healthy growth. That they're forecasting next year it'll go to 2.5 million. So I mean, it's like the growth is going to come. Now, having said that,
nobody wants them, John.
Pardon?
Nobody wants them though.
Yeah, nobody wants them, right?
Nobody
Well,
wants
that's
them.
going to change. You guys know, as we get second gen platforms, second gen batteries, more and more and more public charging. Give it 3 years. That's when I
Yeah.
think things will really start to take off. But let's backtrack to right now. Today, 1.6 million. I'm guessing in the U.S. that's what's that? 60% of that's Tesla, right? So that means everybody else is fighting over, roughly half the market, maybe a little over half the market. And so you got at what, like 7, 8 major manufacturers vying for that. And if you start breaking it down into segments of the market, and you take like two-row crossovers, biggest segment, the hottest thing out there. And you look at its potential market share this year, it's like 250,000 units. So you got Tesla and everybody else fighting over 250,000 units, and nobody can make money in the segment. So there's the problem, is that, remember, this whole push to EV, it's not driven by business, it's driven by government regulation. Thou shalt reach, what the EPA wanted was 67% of new car sales in 2032 being EVs. And it's just not going to happen. I mean, the public's not ready for it. They're not there yet. So that's the dilemma that the industry's in right now. And this is, by the way, too, why the Biden administration just backed off and allowed a lot more hybrids to be sold between now and 2032. But that's the big struggle in the industry. They invested a couple of years ago when it looked like EV sales were going to explode. They thought we're going to, fast track right behind Tesla, and we'll be on their coattails. And as the market expands, we'll be great. Well, the market didn't expand, but they invested for that expansion. So that's their big problem right now. They've overinvested for what the actual demand is, and they're losing their shirt on it. Ford's the only one that publishes the numbers, and everybody jumps on Ford's back, but I guarantee you they're all losing money.
Yeah.
Chase, especially when you're making those 200 kilowatt hour Silverados.
Yeah. Chase, I just wanted to follow up on something that John said that I think is really important. And I don't know if I used this analogy on the last one, but I used it at a couple of conferences and things like that. And part of what John's talking about is, a couple of years ago, the EV sales, what I call the EV sales pizza pie, let's say, was a 12-inch pizza, right? And you sliced it up by 40 slices, right? With Tesla getting, 60, 70% of that. Well, roll forward now, there's like 90 slices of pizza, right? And the pizza, it grew. It's now an 18-inch pizza, right? But if you're, Audi, and, 4 years ago, you had in a segment, you had 2 or 3 other competitors. Well, now you have 8 other competitors in that same segment. So, but the segment isn't growing 6x or 4x or whatever. It's growing 2x or something like that, right? So to John's point, I think it's a really important point. Like, the market is growing, but we have twice as many EV models. And so when you break it down at the model or segment level, like, it's hard for anybody to have significant growth, right? Because
what's
there's
the
just so many more consumer options. What's that, Matt?
What's the actual differentiation that we're identifying here? It's a great point, Loren, because what it really identifies is we're getting back to that brass tacks approach for each brand of what's the cachet of their brand, their design, their methodologies behind why you would want to gravitate to that model vehicle, right? It's kind of traditional automotive marketing in that respect, because we're all kind of seeing it sort of get vanilla around what we're seeing as an offering, and then spreading things out a lot. And so I think to me, kind of high level, it's like, what are the 3 factors? It's like, well, we've got, horrendous interest rates still, for the most part. Yeah. We have a lack of ability for people to get into a vehicle that might be electric, that's even remotely cost, like at a cost level where that's like, this is practical, because you take $60,000 and you try to, finance that over 5, 6, 7 years at 7-8%. That's a nightmare. So that's why, again, we're hearing and already seeing that the used EV market's getting a little bit more attention now, because people that might be attracted to it, they're saying, well, okay, I'll buy something that was on a 3-year lease that's 3 years old, but I can get into that for $30K or something. I think that's great to see, but I think it's indicative of what people are saying to the market, which is, okay, yeah, we do want electric cars, but we don't want $60,000 ones. We want $25,000 ones. and also, but they can't fight the interest rates. And then the last element being, I just always come back to it, is why would the general public rush in to buy cars that run on a fuel they don't understand? Like, because if that's the true differentiator for the user experience, interest rate, cost, and like peace of mind, there you go. And we just don't have a good puzzle for that right now. Maybe outside of, I mean, Tesla still has it, I think, in a way, but Elon is finding ways to just kind of like throw an M80 into that toilet. So,
well, I think, yeah, that's a whole nother, that could be another podcast. But
right.
I think, kind of going back to your analogy real quick, Loren, though, about the pizza got slightly bigger, but instead of feeding 10 people, you're feeding a small community center or something. Yeah. The difference also is, I think with this evolution to electric vehicles, there is, and also kind of ties in Matt's comment about kind of like copying other people's homework, is the fact that so many of these companies are going to like the kind of the clean sheet electric vehicle design. And when you do the skateboard design, sure, you get great lower center of gravity, but in a lot of ways, like especially if you're like a traditional brand like Porsche or Audi, you start looking at some of their electric vehicle products, and not only are you kind of confined to a more specific body style that you're working with, well, you're sharing that platform with Audi, you're sharing with all these. So not only are you fighting against your own like group, the ability for differentiation is now, I think, in a lot of ways, a lot harder to do with the electric vehicle technology, and to like make a really sporty EV. And like one of the big things Porsche said was like, oh, well, we use the same motor as Audi, sure, but we put it behind the axle, so now it's more like a Porsche. And like, yeah, maybe.
That was
but
actually
I don't.
That was a PR talking point at some point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And so I think that's like just another example of like, yeah, Porsche could use like, oh yeah, we've got our Boxer 6 in the bag. You know what we do. Audi's got their inline 5. There's like a lot more differentiation, but that I think that's just been a challenge. I think for the last decade and a half is obviously the badge engineering, but also now going into the electric realm where it's new for everyone, but they also have to share components. And then in a lot of ways, the starting point doesn't allow for, I mean, the Porsche, good or bad, kind of went with a 2-geared transmission, for example. And that's kind of been a meh thing. And it's like trying to differentiate doesn't really reward in the same ways that it has traditionally for, I think, a lot of these brands versus like a big thing, especially when you look at the international markets, domestically and generationally, like the software level is kind of like how the person lives with the vehicle day to day. There's just so many of these different variables that have really made it so much harder to like stand out. And
Chase, I would say like nobody cares about anything that you just talked about. Like no average consumer. Car geeks care about that stuff. But you know what people care about?
What do they care about, Loren?
The Kia EV9. It's a 3-row SUV.
3 rows.
That looks different, awesome, and nobody cares that it's electric.
I'll say it looks different.
Jason's like, I don't know about the aesthetic. Well, to Lauren's point is,
but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, what are they shopping for?
Where's the electric Tahoe? You know, like, right? Like,
well, this is exactly what I'm talking about, though. Kia doesn't really have to have this infighting. Like, sure, they've got the high end and a little bit of the Genesis thing, but they've gone all in on EVs, and they've actually figured a pretty good strategy of how to differentiate. Whereas like Audi shares stuff with, and then like even looking at GM, they've even struggled between like, how do you differentiate the Silverado and the Denali? There's just, I think that example you're talking about from what is important to the end user from a product standpoint is spot on. The actual backside of it doesn't really matter to the end consumer, but the actual manufacturers have struggled to even get to the point to clearly build a product in having their own freedom to build that product to get to the consumer that really has that appeal, like the EV9 or a few others do. And I know I don't like the looks of it, but it's like spot on the market for what the market wants.
Yeah, I mean, out here where I am in the San Francisco Bay Area suburbs, I mean, I am seeing like the Rivian R1S everywhere now, and the Kia.
Sure.
Like, it's like, well, hello, that's what, soccer moms drive in the suburbs, 3-row SUVs. And so guess what they're buying? My point is, is nobody cares about 2-speed transmissions or like any of that stuff. Like I have my best buddy has done very well in his career, 3 IPOs, et cetera. He could buy any car he wanted. A couple months ago, he goes, "Wow, that Kia EV9!" Like, this is a guy that drives Land Rovers and Porsches and stuff like that, and he was like totally stoked by it because he always has a big SUV. Like, never in my life would I've expected him to utter the 3 letters of KIA. Right. And if you
But
watch,
I think once again, I think we're in agreement. We're just talking about from two different perspectives. And what Kia, like I said, I don't like the looks of the Kia, but it's like outside of what Tesla did with the Cybertruck, Kia and Hyundai have been the only brands like making really kind of radical looking cars that not only stand out to the consumer, but they stand out and then also deliver like in the market what people want, like going straight to the EV9 and having a big SUV.
What I hear you saying, Chase, is that the way that auto brands have differentiated themselves over the years, and effectively through the engineering set the stage for who they were as a brand. We have, through electrification, I mean, there's a great deal of complexity that goes on with mechanical engineering. I mean,
Right.
think about the different pathways you can take, how you design an engine. Right? It could be naturally aspirated. It could be supercharged. It could be turboed. It could be it could be, what is the displacement of it? Is it rotary? There's this very interesting and very complex catalog of how automakers have taken mechanical engineering and differentiated themselves and leveraged oil and gas to make that possible. And then they've applied that to their branding. And then to your point about design language and what does a brand represent at the aesthetic side of it, it's been a very complex blend of product development for a very long time that has created in my opinion, an emotional product that people buy into, and it becomes a part of their identity. And through electrification, we have removed, as we talk about so often, a great deal of that complexity. And wow, the maintenance is reduced by so much. But then these engineers and these auto brands are saying, yeah, that's true. That's great. So what are we now? Because now we're all sourcing prismatic cells or cylindrical cells from Panasonic or whoever it might be. Okay, fine. We have an electric motor. What's the differentiation of that? Well, it's a rotor and a stator. And ours is behind the axle.
You're 100% on. Like it's one thing for Chevy to say, yeah, we got a big block V8. Well, yeah. How do you sell prismatic cells with a permanent magnet motor?
You don't. I mean, to Loren's point, it's like people but the gearheads are like, I mean, V8 sounds fun to some people. It's got a Hemi. I mean, like however you want to go about it. It's been fun for years. But to Loren's point, it's like, it kind of just goes in one ear and out the other for some people, because then they buy
it. It has for a lot of years. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's still been a marketing talking point.
Total gearheads like myself, we care about that stuff. But the vast majority of Americans really don't even know what displacement engine they have. They have no clue what transmission they have. Some people don't even know if they have front drive or rear drive. So that's the reality.
So so many people think Teslas are hybrids. So it's like,
or that a Prius is electric.
Right.
So styling, hugely important. Yeah. And increasingly now, the whole user interface, how easy it, can you bring your digital world seamlessly into your car with you? How does it work with you? And how complicated or how simple is it? That's far more meaningful to people today. So the days of, big block V8s thundering down Woodward Avenue, that doesn't resonate with the public anymore. And in reality, it never did for the mass market in terms of what they were buying. So there's huge opportunity with electric cars. And, Tesla is the prime example of that. It came blowing into the market, flattened, a good chunk of the luxury market in a totally new and different way. And it's up to the legacies now to figure out how to do the same thing.
Well, and to John,
that's
that point,
kind of what I speak to.
What they have to figure out is they're reimagining the core competency and the heritage of what their brands have been.
Exactly.
Not being mechanical engineering, not being around the big loud. That's the thing too. Is even the sensory experience of the brand that they've built for a century. We are taking away the sound. we were taking away the feel of a rumble. I mean, there are things that we hear this all the time. The smell.
That all works for Kia. Who has ever said they want the rumble of a Kia? I mean, and so like that's why I'm talking about. That's why it works so well for them.
Yeah,
it's like this is kind of a clean sheet to position us, and now we can deliver what the market wants. Whereas if you're out, you're like, well, how do we make this kind of like sexy German, European, sporty electric thing, and then compete against the other Germans?
Look, Loren, you were bringing it up. I mean, Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, they're rocking it. I mean, if you had told me pre-COVID that in 5 years people would be paying $60,000 for a Kia, I would have laughed at you. You don't know what you're talking about. And they have been brilliant, Kia and Hyundai, at going, hey, here's our opportunity. Toyota's dragging its feet. Honda's trying to figure out what to do. Nissan, they tried. They're not even in the picture. Here's our chance. Because those are the people who cross-shop our cars. It's not the Detroit 3. It's the Japanese who cross-shop to an extent, maybe Volkswagen. So they took the bull by the horns and they've run with it. I don't think they're making any money on it. But, man, have they changed people's perceptions of their brand. And now they're perceived as one of the leaders in electrification, at least amongst the legacies.
No, John, I think you just captured the brand perception that they captured of being of an innovative brand and being a part of the future of transportation. I think the thing you pointed out too, John, that's so fundamental on the software side is at the end of the day, because of the simplification of the drivetrain, and if you can have a high voltage battery pack that just is reliable, software is going to be the key for all of these companies moving forward.
Right.
And but even for Kia, Hyundai, that's not where they've really been shining. It's really been about design language, doing something retro or fun, and really establishing that they are, by image, an innovative EV company.
No, that's generally fair, Matt, but I would also say their user interface is one of the best in the business. I mean, something as simple as pairing a phone. I mean,
it's better than some. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's still gaps of just some of the basic functionalities of, like, again, Tesla Rivian. I think that if you go and use the interfaces of those two vehicles, and then you go and use a Kia Hyundai, you see the vast gaps.
No, totally.
And then go get an Ford Lightning and wait for it to take 3 seconds for it to go to the next screen, and that's where you're just like, okay.
Well, look, Tesla, Rivian, they're software companies, right, at heart, and the legacy automakers are not. They're trying to learn how, and they're struggling with it. I mean, really, Cariad blew up in Volkswagen's face. Mary Barr was just out on the West Coast opening a new software, center in Silicon Valley because they've recognized we got to go to the Valley if we're really going to be able to compete here. Yeah. So, Ford's doing a Skunk Works program out there too. And that's their struggle, is they've got this big legacy industrial machine that so many people's and communities' lives depend upon, and they've got to figure out how to build up a new company within at the same time, and don't mix the two, because the big industrial machine will smother anything that comes in new if it's allowed to, work together. So they got to keep it separate. It's a huge mess. It's going to be a mess for the rest of the decade, and it's all a race to see who screws up the least.
So, John,
that's John's prediction for 2024.
Well, I was going to say, John, do you remember what your prediction for 2024 was originally?
I don't.
I mean, we kind of went down a rabbit hole, but we had been talking about sales of EVs, really. And your prediction was you didn't think that the $7,500 point of sale would really make a big difference or move the needle in selling EVs. And to be honest, we've brought up incentives a little bit, but we haven't really talked about that as like what is impacting or making a difference one way or the other. Sure, it's price, but I'm kind of curious if you still agree with that, or I kind of think it just helps with the price argument, but I don't think it
does help with the price argument. That's right.
Yeah.
But,
it's not like, yes, I'm going to do it because of $7,500.
I don't think it's moved the needle, but here's again, too, why on my show, Autoline After Hours, we just had an executive from JD Power, and she dropped a bombshell, I thought. 40% of the new car buying public in the United States has no clue of the $7,500 rebate for EVs. Don't even know about it. And she's like, you want to sell EVs? Tell the public $7,500. I mean, it should be front and center instead of saying, save the planet or zero emissions or long range or whatever it happens to be. Let the public know there's money out there. And by the way, there's, of course, the OEMs wouldn't do much about used, but nobody knows about what is it, $4,500, $4,000 if you buy a used EV?
Used
Nobody
one,
knows about that.
yeah.
Well, but they pulled the rug out from under the success that $7,500 tax credit had been by
Yeah.
how they applied it to battery production, mineral procurement. I think that the best of intentions by policymakers to say we're incentivizing job creation and innovation in industry domestically. That's the goal of this. But I think they needed to stage that, and we've already seen them backtrack on it, Loren. Right? I mean, they've actually
Yeah.
said like, all right, we're taking a step back on when we're the dates on this so we can bring some more EVs back into that 7,500 fold, because it went from like 45, 50 vehicles to like 13. And it's like, well, that's part of why people stopped giving a damn about that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's like the flaw, and to connect what you said with what John said is like, there was good intent for the redesign of the tax credit, but it turned into trade policy, anti-China policy, not how do we get more EVs in the hands of American consumers. They conflated the two, and therefore, like you said, it went from 80 EVs could qualify for some level of the tax credit. I needed an Excel file to figure out what it was, but
now you need a cocktail napkin.
But now it's like, okay, there's like 10 of them that qualify. Like, so I think everybody, like I always say this, Matt, and you know this, that in the face of complexity, consumers choose simplicity. And, like this got so complex that they're just going to screw it. I'm going to buy a Toyota Camry hybrid.
Well, and Chase, like you said earlier, it's like they're going in and asking these questions, and like you experienced with that one dealership.
Yeah, exactly.
Where the moment it came to talking about any of this stuff, they're like, we don't even want to bring it up, man.
Yeah.
Like, just buy that thing that runs on gasoline. I will get my commission. You'll get a vehicle that takes you down the road. And so that keys right to what Loren's saying. It's like, yeah, path of least resistance, without a doubt. So. Yeah, well, I think our predictions were fairly good.
Well, I think Loren might have been the most spot on. Do you remember what yours was, Loren?
I don't really, but I think I said something like that. I thought EV sales were going to continue to grow at a fairly strong level, but obviously less than previous years. I don't know, something like that, maybe.
You should phone a friend. That was incorrect.
Oh.
You actually had two that were pretty spot on. You said there we will see a return of plug-in hybrids, which we've already talked about quite a bit. And then you said 2024 is going to be an ugly year in the EV charging space.
Oh, yes. Okay, now it's all coming back. Yes, I would like to say I was right on both of those. Yeah.
I think you were extremely right on both of those. As kind of the guy who is the one that always tracks the NEVI funding and that whole space, I think probably better than anyone else out there. Are there any other kind of interesting trends you've been seeing with kind of the rollout of more EV chargers because of some of this fallout?
Yeah, I mean, kind of in no particular order. I mean, I think one of the trends we've seen is a shift in who the site hosts are and like the whole business model for the fast charging industry. So more than 50% of the site host winners, they're not necessarily the applicant. Sometimes they are the Sheets, the Wawas, the Circle Ks, the Travel Centers of America, the Pilot, the Loves, etc. Why? Because they check all of the boxes that the states are looking for. Safe, well lit, amenities, bathroom, Wi-Fi, food, etc. Right? And so at one level, like the fast charging industry, sort of started out as what I call the grant and incentives business. There is no business model there. It's let's go out and get money from the state, from the Air Resources Board, from the utilities. We'll build these things with this other money and then cross our fingers in 4 or 5 years. Enough people are driving EVs that will break even. Right?
Oops.
And then, that hasn't worked so well for everybody. We're starting to see utilization is actually really starting to get solid now. But I think the sort of the real shift, the inflection point we started to see this year is that all of the major oil companies / convenience store, travel center chains woke up and went, oh my God, we're like perfect for the future of this transition. People are going to sit for 20, 30 minutes at our place, they're going to walk inside and spend $15, $20 on food and beverages, right? Like,
Theoretically,
how do we get some of this money? Let's do this, right? So I think there's a shift, and fundamentally it's the same transition that happened with gas stations, right? Like, John and I are old enough to know this, but like 30, 40 years ago, they were gas stations with service bays, right? And now, so it was fascinating. I've learned a lot about a Midwest convenience store chain called Quick Trip. 35% of their revenue is now from food, right? Like they're a supermarket with 12 gas pumps out front. Like they've completely flipped.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like the kind of this year, that's been one of the things that I think we all saw was coming, but it's actually starting to happen. Like all these companies have jumped on board. The second part, Chase, really what you sort of referred to is too many companies, just like what John was talking about in sort of in the automotive EV space, too many hardware companies have entered the fast charging space. I mean, I have clients that I can't mention that are from Asia and stuff that are planning major attacks on the US, that was wrong term to use. That are planning to enter the US market next year, right? Like we already have too many fast charging hardware companies, but they're just coming in droves, right? And so there's certain companies, I won't mention their name, but like they were just too expensive, right? And so it's gotten much more difficult and much more competitive in the fast charging hardware space in particular, right? And so and so we're seeing some fallout from that. It's going to continue to be ugly. But then we also have like just dozens and dozens of new entrants into the charging network space.
Oh yeah,
right.
And and we're seeing new companies like Rove, if any of you've heard of them, out of Southern California, that's building like a forecourt, they call them in Europe, but basically it's a store with solar canopies and 40 bays, and you're going there to go inside the store, right, while your car sits out front, right? So we're going to see a lot of innovation. And if those companies do that right, then people aren't going to want to stop at the fast chargers that are located out by the garbage cans, behind a McDonald's restaurant down off of I-5, right? They're going to want to go to a much better environment. So we're in the midst of a kind of significant shift in business models, players, competitiveness. I know that was a lot, but yeah, there's a lot going on in the space.
Yeah, it definitely seems like what the charging space has struggled with was like getting the right land and making sure they get the permitting and all this stuff set up just to even get the thing built, like a couple of years ago. And it still is, but especially then. And then it became reliability. And now you have like the Electrify Americas who don't even make their own hardware. They buy the hardware. They have to do all of this kind of finagling behind the scenes to find a place to do this. And yeah, now you have the kind of large gas station C-stores come in that they know how to do permitting. They have the land. They have all this. They'll just take some free money if they can, and then just have the people come and buy the stuff they're already buying. They don't really care if it's gas or electricity. They're not really making money on either of those. And I think then what's really interesting too is like when you actually look at the EV charging hardware space, it kind of reminds me of like the PC market like a decade and a half ago, where it was just like battle of who has the most widgets. And then in the end, it just became like the Asian markets just flooded it with price for what could kind of come in and deliver the same value, because it really didn't matter as long as it worked who did what better and who had maybe a slightly different, better charging screen, because so much of it has also become a software level too. That just kind of becomes the end consumer doesn't care. They just want the best price.
Well, if they can't differentiate their functionality. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I realize we're kind of coming up on the end of our time here, and I feel like that's probably maybe that's a bit of a sour point to end it on.
Womp
But
womp.
I don't know if there's any positive out real quickly. If anyone on here has any kind of positive outlooks about the EV space or EV charging space that they've seen recently.
Well, I'll
Loren.
share some positive news is Tesla's rehiring some of the people that they laid off.
Sorry.
That is fair, yeah.
Slow golf clap on that one. That was an interesting one to watch. Wasn't that a fun month? I mean, and it felt like it just overtook every like moment of talking around what's going on in this space, and you know, and the collective gasp that the industry had. I mean, it's good. That's good to hear. I just don't like the idea that, you know, we have a lot of people. Oh, go ahead.
I think what's really interesting is that news masked so much other like bad EV charging news. It's because Tesla gets headlines, and then there's like, well, yeah, and then XYZ charging company laid off 3,000 people. It's like there were so many other like yeah, exactly. So many other things like, well, if they're announcing that's getting all the headlines, let's say our bad news, like FreeWire. We're going for bankruptcy kind of. And it was just like stuff like that. And I don't know. It definitely didn't look good, but my take is like, whenever you look at Tesla, it's always like, there's some short-term craziness. Like, what was it last year? They laid off all their salespeople and then they still sold a bunch of cars. It always seems like there's these super erratic decisions, good or bad, that gets a lot of headlines. And then you kind of look at the long-term output of their success, and it kind of just seems to kind of all go away. I was kind of, what's really funny to me, and I don't know, I'd be kind of curious maybe on your thoughts, Loren, about this, is when I first heard this, it reminded me of so many things I've heard happen previously in the tech industry. Like I have heard so many times when like someone gets annoyed by a team and they just let the whole team go. Like Steve Jobs was famous for like letting the original version of iCloud team just go because he didn't like the product. And I think it just got so.
Well, that was a crap launch. Let's be
well. And I'm not even talking about iCloud. I'm talking about like the me.com thing way back in the day. Like that was the second iteration of it.
Yeah.
And so to me, it is just really interesting that I feel it. I guess I was trying to be positive, and now it's just being negative. But it is kind of weird how there isn't a good all this really short term, like small kind of things. And yeah, it's not great that he fired all those people and then like hired half of them back in the next week anyway. But it's like it just kind of feeds in, unfortunately, to so much of the media narrative and kind of a lot of the headlines that people are seeing versus like the actual facts. And kind of looking at it from like a longer term thing. And I don't know, John, you're smiling. So I guess maybe nothing's new. It's me venting.
Is there some happy news out there? Is there something positive about them? So here's one thing that I noticed that I thought was important. U.S. EV sales not growing that fast this year. We talked about maybe second half being different. But that's mainly because, and this is based on registrations, because Tesla does not report sales in the United States. But based on that, largely the slowdown's been with Tesla. And if you take it out of the equation and look at the other legacies, EV sales grew 75%. So I think that's extremely positive. And if Tesla gets its act together, things will be pretty good.
Well, that's a great point. And the one comment I made when all this news came about the supercharger team and everything else, the one element that I think is, and I've shared this today on LinkedIn, is Elon is becoming a genuine net negative for the Tesla brand. And I don't know how in the long term they're going to contend with that. But you see it on social media and owners groups all the time that did not buy Teslas. And you will even hear people say, I went and test drove a Model Y and whatever vehicle they ended up buying. And they will even say, I actually liked a lot of the features of the Tesla, but I was not going to give money to Elon. Yep. And it's like, well, that's okay, Tesla board of directors, you get to contend with that. I think from a positivity perspective, I just came from a week or two ago being at the Electrify Expo event in Long Beach. And again, they have 8 events nationwide, and they've been growing that event series. It's a public festival to come and test drive EVs. It's the biggest event they've ever had, and that's the 4th year they've now had it in Southern California, and it keeps growing. So I think to John's point, there's positive things happening outside the realm of Tesla. And I think that, and there's evidence all around us. I think the reason why we oftentimes keep coming back to this is kind of like John and I were talking about this a little bit before we started talking. It's just this kind of ebb and flow of just kind of like, yay, this positive, negative. And we can't change it overnight, but we don't oftentimes whatever the media topic is, we don't have a measured response to those moments and to the talking points and to the discussions. It's oftentimes what's going to get the clicks and how can we, and Jon Stewart said years ago at one of the events he held, what was it, the Rally to Restore Sanity, he said, if we amplify everything, we hear nothing. And that quote has stuck with me for so long, because we live that seemingly every day in the EV world, because everything gets this amplification, and it just does distract us from, again, positive news, progress, things that are going in the right direction. It's a muddy, process we're getting through. But if you really look at the last 10 years and you take a step back and take a breath, wow, what has been accomplished. It is very impressive. It's not perfect, but we've made a lot of progress and things just are going in the right direction. It's just going to require more hard work. So.
Yeah. And Jace, I would just close with kind of an exclamation point on something that John said, actually sort of earlier, which is, we're sort of backloaded for this year. And I think there's a little bit of a kind of the quasi Osborne effect, right? In that, we had this rush of new models a couple of years ago. And then, we haven't had a lot of new exciting models, kind of for mainstream consumers come to market. But now this year, like we've got the EV9, we've got the Volvo EX30, the 90, we've got the Chevrolet Blazer Equinox. Like we actually have a whole bunch of new products to get the market excited again. I think
you mentioned the Cybertruck, Loren. I don't know.
Oh, God.
I do have a prediction for that. I don't think that vehicle will be in production for, I don't know, if in 3 years' time it's still being produced. I think it might be very shocking.
I actually got a hot take on that. I disagree.
Really?
For us, that's and here's what really hot take. I think it still looks better than an EV9. But here to me though is like people who don't care about cars think it's sweet. People who
I'll give you one experience. I drove the Cybertruck. I think it's pretty cool. But I happened to be at a local state park where I was mountain biking, and there's a playground there with a bunch of little kids. And a Cybertruck drove in. And I mean, there's all kinds of trucks and SUVs and blah, blah, blah. Cybertruck drove in, parked. It emptied the children's playground. They went to that thing like moths to a light bulb.
Exactly.
And one little boy going around, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And that, to me, was stunning. I mean, that truck
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Very young generation.
It's like the 80s Countach for like this generation. Yeah. They think it's such a cool, weird, angular thing. And then you just talk to like regular car people and they like that it just doesn't look like anything else on the road. They're like, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I will put a qualifier on my comment about it won't be built in 3 years. If they can't get the damn price down to $40,000 like they promised, then they can't. Because there is a very, very low ceiling to people that are willing to pay $120,000 for that truck. Right. And also the performance aspects of it, it just isn't what it was promised to be, right? 500 miles of range, all this stuff. They have to either deliver on those promises for what that high-priced model is going to be, because there's only a small amount of early adopters who want the aesthetic of it, to also just kind of turn a blind eye to it didn't ship with autopilot. I mean, like there are some elements about it that were just damning.
I 100% agree with you, but I don't. That's because we know it. We're car people. We understand that.
Oh no,
they don't care.
The kids rushing out of the playground like John described. That is why it'll still be produced.
They think it's cool that it looks wild and it's electric. They're like, oh, this thing's game over.
Yeah.
But on that, I think this is a good place as any to end it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. For anyone listening, we will have everyone's contact info and more in the show notes. But with that, John, Loren, Matt, thank you so much for being on again. Really fun to kind of recap these predictions, and looking forward to speaking with all of you soon again.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this insightful mid-year check-in on the Grid Connections podcast. Special thanks to our returning guests, John McElroy from Autoline Network, Loren McDonald of EV Adoption, and Matt Teske of ChargeWay. Really appreciate all of them swinging by to share their expert perspectives on the always evolving EV landscape. We hope you found today's discussion as enlightening as we did. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with at least one other person who would benefit from this information as well. And don't forget to leave us a positive review on our podcast page. It really does help us reach more listeners like you and continue bringing you the latest in EV news and insights. Until next week, this is the Grid Connections podcast signing off.